Waiter called Caitlin Clark a nobody and discovered she owned the restaurant. It was a rainy Thursday evening in Indianapolis when Caitlin Clark pushed through the glass doors of Meridian Steakhouse, one of the most prestigious restaurants in downtown. The fine October drizzle had left her blonde strands slightly damp, and she adjusted the hood of her gray University of Iowa hoodie as her eyes adjusted to the warm golden lighting inside. The restaurant buzzed with typical late-afternoon energy. Suited executives discussed business at polished mahogany tables, while couples celebrated anniversaries under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The aroma of grilled steaks and red wine hung in the air, mixed with the subtle sounds of conversation and clinking glasses. Caitlin had chosen this place deliberately. After a grueling 3-hour practice with the fever, followed by a sponsor meeting that ran longer than expected, she just wanted a moment of peace. No autographs, no photos, no conversations about stats or next season. Just her, a decent meal, and maybe a few minutes to process the changes her life had taken over the past few months. She surveyed the environment with experienced eyes. Few knew that 3 weeks earlier, she had become the majority investor in this establishment through a quiet deal with the previous owner, Marcus Webb, a former NBA player who had decided to retire from the restaurant business. The transaction had been kept in absolute secrecy. Not even most of the staff knew about the ownership change. Choosing a corner table near the window overlooking Monument Circle, Caitlin sat down and pulled off her hood, letting her hair fall naturally over her shoulders. Outside, building lights were beginning to reflect in the puddles on the sidewalk, creating an urban mosaic that always relaxed her. That's when he approached. Tyler Morrison, 23, had started working at Meridian just 2 weeks earlier. Coming from a middle-class family in Carmel, an Indianapolis suburb, he had landed the job through a friend and was determined to impress. Tyler had his own ambitions: economics at Butler University during the day, waiting tables at night, dreaming of someday opening his own business. But Tyler also carried something common among young people his age and background: a superficial perception of status based purely on appearances. When his eyes landed on Caitlin, he saw only a young woman in a hoodie and worn sneakers. He didn't recognize the face that had graced sports magazine covers for months, nor did he notice the confident posture of someone accustomed to stages and spotlights. To him, she simply didn't fit the clientele pattern he expected to serve at this establishment. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and leave in the comments. Have you ever been in a similar situation where you were judged by your appearance? Tyler approached the table with deliberately slow steps, carrying only a cleaning cloth in his hands, no menu, no water glass. His expression was a mixture of poorly concealed irritation and presumptuous superiority. "Excuse me," he said, his voice loaded with barely contained sarcasm. "But are you sure you can afford this place?" The restaurant didn't stop completely, but several conversations lowered in volume. At the next table, Margaret Williams, a 45-year-old corporate attorney, paused with her fork in the air, shocked by the audacity of the question. 2 tables away, a couple of doctors exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding. Caitlin felt a familiar sense of déjà vu. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Throughout her career, from high school days in Iowa to becoming one of the most recognizable faces in women's basketball, she had faced constant underestimation. Opposing coaches who doubted her speed, commentators who questioned her endurance, and now a waiter judging her financial capacity by the hoodie she wore. But Caitlin had learned something valuable over the years. Impulsive anger rarely teaches lasting lessons. She took a deep breath, allowing a slight smile to touch the corners of her mouth, not of sarcasm or contempt, but of someone who knew exactly how this situation would unfold. "I'm sure," she replied calmly, her voice maintaining a neutral tone that revealed neither irritation nor condescension. Maybe you could bring the menu? Tyler hesitated for a moment. There was something about her response, a quiet confidence that left him slightly uncomfortable, but his arrogance quickly reasserted control. Look, I don't want to create an embarrassing situation here, he continued, now in a louder voice, ensuring nearby tables could hear clearly. But this place is pretty expensive. Entrees start at $85. Maybe you'd be better off trying Applebee's down the street. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Margaret Williams let out an audible sigh of indignation. The doctor couple now stared openly, their expressions ranging from shock to morbid curiosity about how this situation would resolve. Caitlin maintained her smile, but her blue eyes gained an intensity that Tyler had not yet learned to recognize. It was the same look she reserved for the final minutes of decisive games, calm, calculating, and absolutely relentless. I see, she said, leaning slightly forward. And how long have you been working here, Tyler? For the first time, he looked surprised. How did she know his name? He glanced quickly at his ID badge, confirming it was visible. 2 weeks, he answered, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. 2 weeks, Caitlin repeated, nodding thoughtfully. And in those 2 weeks, has anyone taught you about this establishment's values? About treating all customers with respect, regardless of appearance? Tyler felt the first flash of nervousness. There was something about the way she spoke, a natural authority that was beginning to unnerve him. He stammered. It's okay, Caitlin interrupted gently. Everyone makes mistakes, especially when they're new to a job. It was at that moment that Robert Chen, Meridian's general manager, emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of special dishes for table 12. Robert, a 38-year-old man with over 15 years of hospitality experience, had worked at some of Chicago's finest restaurants before accepting the Indianapolis position 6 months earlier. His eyes swept the main dining room as part of his usual supervision routine when they suddenly stopped at the corner table. The blood drained from his face instantly. Robert recognized Caitlin Clark immediately. As an avid basketball fan, he had watched virtually every one of her college games and had closely followed her transition to the WNBA. More importantly, he had been present at the meeting 3 weeks ago when she officially became the restaurant's majority investor. Let us know in the comments what you think the manager's reaction will be when he sees this situation unfolding. Abandoning the tray at the nearest service station, Robert crossed the dining room with quick but discreet steps. His heart raced as he processed the scene before his eyes. Tyler Morrison, the rookie waiter, clearly confronting the establishment's new owner in a way that could result in catastrophic consequences not just for him, but for the restaurant's entire reputation. Tyler, Robert called as he approached, his voice carrying contained urgency. Can I speak with you for a moment? Tyler turned, annoyed by the interruption. I'm just explaining to this customer that maybe she's in the wrong place. Robert briefly closed his eyes, as if gathering strength to deal with a situation that had become much worse than he had imagined. When he opened them again, his gaze fixed on Caitlin with a mixture of recognition, respect, and deep embarrassment. Miss Clark, he said, his voice now formal but laden with sincerity. Please accept my sincerest apologies. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Tyler blinked several times, confused. Clark? Why did the name sound familiar? Caitlin looked at Robert with an expression that mixed understanding and patience. Hello, Robert. No worries. How are things going here? Very well, thank you, Robert replied, still visibly nervous. Tyler, you're speaking with Caitlin Clark. She is. But Tyler still hadn't connected the dots. The name echoed in his mind, but the combination of the casual hoodie and his own ignorance about women's sports created a cognitive barrier he couldn't yet overcome. "She is who?" Tyler asked, his arrogance beginning to give way to confusion. Robert took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would completely change the situation's dynamics. "Tyler, you're speaking with one of the biggest stars in women's basketball today. She was College Player of the Year, broke multiple NCAA records, and currently plays in the WNBA for the Indiana Fever." Tyler felt his legs weaken slightly. Fragmented memories of sports news he had seen channel surfing began forming in his mind. That face, those penetrating blue eyes. He had seen them before in headlines, in highlights that occasionally appeared on his social media timeline. But more important than that, Robert continued, his voice now taking on a tone that cut through the restaurant's noise. "She is the new majority investor of Meridian Steakhouse. Tyler, you just questioned whether the restaurant's owner can afford the food." The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. His wobbly legs could barely support him as the reality of the situation crystallized in his mind. Owner. She was the owner. The nearby tables, which had already been paying attention to the situation, now watched with fascination as the story's plot twist unfolded before their eyes. Margaret Williams whispered to her dinner companion, "My God, it really is her, Caitlin Clark." Tyler looked at Caitlin with wide eyes, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. All the apology words he tried to form seemed inadequate given the magnitude of his mistake. I. He stammered, panic now fully visible in his expression. "Miss Clark, I didn't know. I never." Caitlin gently raised her hand, interrupting his verbal stumbles. Throughout her career, she had learned that the most impactful moments of leadership didn't come from humiliating those who made mistakes, but from transforming those mistakes into growth opportunities. "Tyler," she said, her voice maintaining the same calm tone she had used throughout the interaction. "Take a deep breath." Tyler obeyed, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to compose himself. "Now tell me," Caitlin continued, "what did you learn today?" The question caught Tyler off guard. He had prepared for immediate dismissal, maybe even public humiliation. But instead, she was offering an opportunity for reflection. He paused, forcing himself to organize his thoughts. "I learned that I shouldn't judge people by their appearance, and that I should treat all customers with respect, regardless of how they dress." "That's right," Caitlin nodded. "And what else?" Tyler thought for a moment, his mind still processing the lesson. That you never know who someone really is until you actually get to know them?" Caitlin smiled, this time with genuine approval. "Exactly. Tyler, you seem like a smart young man who simply made an error in judgment. We all do that sometimes." Robert watched the interaction with a mixture of relief and admiration. In his 15 years in the industry, he had witnessed many difficult situations, but had rarely seen someone handle such disrespect with such grace and wisdom. "Miss Clark," Robert interjected, "I guarantee this won't happen again. Tyler will undergo additional customer service training and—" "Robert," Caitlin interrupted gently, "Tyler doesn't need punishment. He needs guidance. And sometimes, the best lessons come from the most uncomfortable situations." She turned back to Tyler, who was still visibly shaken but now paying complete attention to her words. "Tyler, you study at Butler, right?" she asked. Tyler nodded, surprised that she knew this. "Economics," he added timidly. "Great," Caitlin said. "So you understand about first impressions and value perceptions." In business, just like in sports, people frequently underestimate each other based on superficial factors. Age, gender, appearance, background. I've experienced this throughout my entire career. She paused, allowing her words to be absorbed not just by Tyler, but by everyone who was listening. But here's what I've learned. True greatness never needs to prove anything immediately. It just walks through the front door and eventually changes everything around it through actions, not words. People at nearby tables now listened openly, many discreetly pulling out their phones to record the moment. Margaret Williams had completely paused her meal, totally absorbed in the leadership lesson unfolding before her. What would you do if you were in Tyler's position? Leave your thoughts in the comments and keep watching to see how this story ends. Now, Caitlin continued, her tone becoming more practical. Could you bring the menu? I'm really hungry after today's practice. Tyler nodded vigorously, relief evident in his expression. Yes, ma'am, right away. And can I start with something to drink? An iced tea would be perfect, Caitlin replied with a genuine smile. As Tyler hurried to get the menu and drink, Robert remained by the table, still processing how Caitlin had transformed a potentially disastrous situation into a life lesson. Miss Clark, he said quietly, your approach was remarkable. Most people in your position would have reacted very differently. Caitlin shrugged modestly. Robert, I grew up in Iowa. My parents taught me that humiliating someone never builds anything. Teaching, on the other hand, that can change a life. She looked around the restaurant, observing how the atmosphere had changed. Conversations had returned to normal, but there was a different energy in the air. A sense that everyone had witnessed something special. Besides, she added with a touch of humor, I really understand the confusion. It's not exactly like I walk around with a crown that says, restaurant owner. Robert laughed, tension finally leaving his shoulders. Well, maybe we should get you one. Tyler returned quickly with an iced tea and an elegantly bound menu. His hands still trembled slightly, but he had clearly made an effort to compose himself. Your iced tea, Miss Clark, he said, carefully placing the glass on the table. And if there's anything you need, anything at all, please let me know. Thank you, Tyler, Caitlin replied cordially. Actually, I have a question for you. Tyler straightened up, ready to fulfill any request. What do you plan to do after you graduate with your economics degree? The question caught Tyler off guard again. He had prepared for questions about the menu or daily specials, not about his career plans. I'd like to open my own business someday, he answered hesitantly. Maybe something in hospitality. I've always been interested in the restaurant industry. Caitlin nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. And what do you think is the most important quality for someone in the hospitality industry? Tyler considered the question seriously, clearly understanding this was more of a lesson than casual conversation. Respect, he answered finally. Respecting every customer, regardless of who they are or how they dress. Perfect, Caitlin said approvingly. Tyler, you clearly have potential. You made a mistake today, but you showed you can learn from it. That's more valuable than someone who never makes mistakes because they never try anything. She paused to take a sip of iced tea before continuing. When you graduate, if you're still interested in the restaurant industry, look me up. There's always room for people who know how to learn and grow. Tyler was speechless. You would do that? Even after what happened today? Especially after what happened today, Caitlin replied firmly. Tyler, some of the most successful people I know are those who had the humility to acknowledge their mistakes and the courage to change. You just demonstrated both qualities. Robert watched the interaction with growing admiration. In his years of experience, he had seen many leadership styles, but had rarely witnessed someone transform a negative situation into a mentoring opportunity so naturally. "Now," Caitlin said, opening the menu, "let's talk about food. What would you recommend for someone who burned about 3,000 calories at practice today?" Tyler smiled for the first time since the situation had begun. "Well, our 16-ounce ribeye with truffle mashed potatoes is incredibly popular. And if you're really hungry, I could suggest starting with our Caesar salad with grilled shrimp." "Perfect," Caitlin said, closing the menu. And Tyler, "Yes, ma'am. Next time a young woman in a hoodie walks in here, remember, she might be the next owner, or simply someone who deserves the same respect you'd give any other customer." Tyler nodded seriously. "I'll never forget, Miss Clark. I promise." As Tyler walked away to process the order, Robert remained briefly by the table. "Miss Clark, thank you for handling this the way you did. Tyler's a good kid, just young and, well, sometimes young people make stupid mistakes." "We've all been young and stupid, Robert," Caitlin laughed. "The difference is whether we learn from it or not." As the evening progressed, the story of how Caitlin Clark had handled the situation spread throughout the restaurant tables. Customers who had witnessed the event shared the story with others, and soon a version of what happened was circulating on social media. Margaret Williams, the lawyer who had witnessed the entire situation, posted a reflection on her LinkedIn about leadership and humility that quickly went viral. The doctor couple, Dr. James and Dr. Sarah Patterson, told the story to their colleagues at the hospital, where it became an example in discussions about respectful patient treatment. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on Tyler Morrison. In the months that followed, he became one of Meridian's most respectful and attentive waiters, treating every customer, from suited executives to college students in ripped jeans, with the same level of courtesy and respect. He also began studying not just economics, but leadership and hospitality management as well. And when he graduated 18 months later, Caitlin Clark kept her word. Tyler was hired as an assistant manager at one of the new restaurants Caitlin had acquired in Chicago, where he applied the lessons learned that rainy night in Indianapolis. The story became legend in Indianapolis restaurant circles, frequently told as an example of how true leadership doesn't humiliate, but educates. How real greatness doesn't need to shout to be recognized, but can transform lives simply through how it chooses to respond to difficult moments. And Tyler Morrison never again judged anyone by the sneakers they wore. Caitlin Clark finished her meal that night in peace, watching the rain that continued to fall gently outside. She had entered the restaurant just wanting a quiet dinner after a long day. Instead, she had left behind a lesson that would be remembered for years. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from speeches or books, but from simple acts of grace in moments when it would be easier to react with anger. If you made it this far, let us know in the comments. What was the biggest lesson you took from this story? And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content like this.